Let's learn now about punctuation. There are two types of punctuation. There is end of sentence punctuation, punctuation that comes at the end of a group of words. That is also called terminal punctuation. And there is in sentence punctuation, the punctuation that separates words within a sentence before you get to that terminal punctuation. Starting first with end punctuation, there are three different ways to punctuate the end of a sentence to let readers know that that sentence has concluded and that you're ready to move on to the next sentence. We have the declarative sentence, the imperative, and the exclamatory. As I mentioned, in most of our writing, unless again, creative writing is always going to be the exception. In creative writing, the characters yell and they go through all these dramatic things and there's lots of implications. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of drama and emotions in which all three types are used commonly. However, in academics, in business correspondence, in a lot of our day-to-day communication when we're writing, we often just make statements, right? Our research is going to be statements. Unless you're directly quoting someone that was making a statement with heightened emotion, most of the time we are just going to make just general statements. Our statements end with just a period. Those are going to be the declarative sentence. We are simply declaring, we are making a declaration or a statement. Those end with a period. Because most of our everyday writing is going to be a declarative sentence, that is what this course is going to focus on. With our declarative sentence, we want to make sure, going back to our 5 elements, that we do always have our end punctuation. Pay really close attention to the type of writing that you're doing to make sure that your end punctuation is going to be correct. If you're writing a research paper, you do not, most of the time, you do not want to yell at your professor. You don't want to add an exclamation mark if you're not yelling, if there isn't a dramatic, heightened sense of emotions, if something isn't urgent. Fire, bomb, duck, he stabbed me. All of these are very dramatic elements. Unless that's what we're going for, you don't want to use an inappropriate end punctuation mark. The same as you wouldn't want to put a question mark if you're not actually asking a question, such as, what time is it? Unless you're asking a question that you expect your reader to actually answer. So this does not include a rhetorical question. Rhetorical questions do not get question marks. When your reader sees a question mark, your reader is expected to answer the question. If you don't want your reader to answer a question, don't put a question mark, and that rules out the question mark for most instances. It also rules out the explanation mark. We are just simply going to make declarations. With that, as you're going through your 5 elements, as you're practicing your sentences, know your audience. Who is your reader? What is the purpose of your writing? If you're writing for academics or in business correspondence, most of the time, again, unless you're quoting someone, most of the time you will simply be making a statement. Make sure that your end punctuation is a period. This should trigger you to think really hard. If you use anything other than a period, why are you using that other end punctuation mark? Make sure that you're doing it deliberately and correctly. An otherwise beautiful sentence could be completely ruined by the incorrect punctuation mark. That will also cause your reader to have to go back and reread the sentence to try to figure out if they miss something, because to the reader, it's not going to read correctly with the incorrect end punctuation. As a review, we have our 5 elements, the last is end punctuation to form a sentence. While there are 3 different types of punctuation, most of us in our day-to-day lives are going to just use the declarative sentence and make a statement. Statements get punctuated only by a period and no other end punctuation. If you're making an explanation or asking a question that you actually want your reader to answer, it is okay to use the other 2 end punctuations. Just be very cautious and know who your reader and your audience is before you do it. Let's talk now about our in-sentence punctuation. You want to make sure not to confuse these because, again, you should never see a sentence that ends with a comma or a semicolon or anything that isn't one of the 3 types we just discussed, primarily a period. There are lots of types of in-sentence punctuations. We have our colons, we have hyphens, we have lots of options here. But we're not going to go into all of those. There are only 2 that we need to know for this course. If you know 2 and you can properly use these 2, you have all the tools that you need for our beautifully constructed sentences with just 2 in-sentence punctuations. If you think back to our conjunctions and our independent clauses and our dependent clauses, do you remember that if you wanted to have a compound sentence, which as a reminder is independent clause 1 properly joined with independent clause 2 and end punctuation. Remember that there are 2 ways to properly join a compound sentence. You have a comma along with your fanboy coordinating conjunction. So our comma is one of our 2 ways that we're going to focus on in this course with our in-sentence punctuation. The comma. Commas, primarily as far as sentence structure goes, they are used to separate clauses. Another function is that commas used to separate items in a list. For example, my favorite months are December, January, and July. Lists are at least 3 items. If you don't have 3 items, you don't have a list. If you have a list, at least 3 items, and you are separating those items in a list, your comma is perfect for that. So the comma has 2 main functions that we're focusing on in this course. It is going to be to separate clauses, both the independent and the dependent, depending on how the structure is. And it is to separate items in a list. A list is at least 3 items. I love apples, bananas, and oranges. That is a list. You would use a comma with after each word in the list. After at least the first 2. So I love apples, comma, bananas, comma, and oranges, period. With our dependent clauses, remember a comma is still used to separate our clauses, but only if the dependent clause is first. If you have a dependent clause, you would use a comma and then your independent clause. If you have an independent clause and then a dependent clause, remember that no comma is used. As a summary, we have punctuation that is used within a sentence, such as commas and semicolons. Remember, your semicolon is also another way to join 2 independent clauses. You will never, ever use a semicolon with a dependent clause and an independent clause, only to join 2 independent clauses. We have a comma and a semicolon, and our end punctuation is going to be one of 3 things. Primarily the period, but it also might be a question mark or an exclamation mark. These are the most basic ways to punctuate a sentence. All you need to know are 3 punctuation marks: the comma, the semicolon, and the period. and you can achieve flawless writing with just 3 punctuation marks. Remember that your comma and your semicolon are used within a sentence. Especially the semicolon, students get confused and will try to end a sentence with a semicolon, or they won't understand that if they have clauses, 2 independent clauses, they join them with a semicolon and end it with a period. It's not 2 separate sentences. Unless you have a period or another end punctuation mark, you are still within one sentence. Until you put that period or the exclamation mark or the question mark, you have one sentence. So as long as it goes, if it's only 5 words, then you have a 5-word sentence. If it's 3 lines long, you're probably doing something wrong, but that's still what you're posing as a sentence. The sentence will continue until you put in end or a terminal punctuation mark. That is everything you need to know for now about punctuation. Anything else, any other punctuation mark in addition to these, is only going to enhance the style and flow and flair of your writing, but it's not going to change the basics. It's not going to change the basic structure. For your basic structure, you just need to know the 3 punctuation marks and you are well on your way. It is now time to practice what we've just learned in this module before heading over to the next one.